let's start with some introduction. So I'm Jane Memmott. I'm a professor of ecology at Bristol University. I'm primarily an entomologist working on insects. I work a lot on plants and insects and ask about the impact of environmental change on ecological communities.
My name is Tommaso Jucker. I'm also based at the University of Bristol in the School of Biological Sciences, where I'm a research fellow and a lecturer. Most of my work revolves around forests and forest ecology, thinking about how forests are responding to rapid environmental change and what this means for people and for nature.
Our brief for the next kind of hour or so is to talk about ecosystem services, which is a subject very close to both our hearts. Although I guess we come at it from very different angles, actually. And perhaps as a way to start this conversation, I was wondering what your favorite ever kind of ecosystem service paper is that kind of captures what it's all about and the importance and excitement of the world.
That's an almost impossible question. So I'm going to pick a paper that I like. I'm not sure it's necessarily my favorite ever paper. But there was a paper published by Cook, Patton, and a whole bunch of other co-authors, which came out in Nature about a year ago. What it does, which I think is really neat, is it explores the rate at which forests that have been in some way impacted by humans, primarily by either logging or habitat fragmentation or habitat loss, how quickly these forests can recover back from their disturbed state to a sort of more semi-natural state, and what the implications of that are for how much carbon they could sequester from the atmosphere. This is actually starting to get a sense of how quickly could we reverse some of the trends that we're seeing globally if we were to do something about protecting forests in different regions of the world. So yeah, that's my last favorite paper from last year, at least. How about yourself?
One of my all-time favorites is actually it's quite an old paper now, actually. It's probably about 10 years old, something like that. But actually, it's a pollination paper. And what it does, it's working on blueberry plantations somewhere in North America. So as far as the eye can see are these huge blueberry plantations. And they're looking at the importance of wild pollinators in there. So a lot of people think, these honeybees do pollination, and that's about as far as they, that's it. But actually, there's this army of wild pollinators that do an awful lot of this ecosystem service of pollination around the world. And what they did in this paper was they planted wildflower strips between the blueberries. They're in these serried ranks of blueberries. They put wildflowers in between. And then they did three things. So they did what everyone normally does, which is to look at, if you put flower strips down, do you get more pollinators coming in? They then looked at whether that led to a greater increase of blueberries. So does it translate into more blueberry production? And then the kind of cherry on the cake bit was to actually ask, well, does it make an economic difference to the blueberry farmer? And what they showed was that actually, if you put these strips in, they pay for themselves after a couple of years. So, why wouldn't you put strips of flowers down between your blueberries? And it just shows that, by helping the pollinators help the farmer effectively. And you've got this wonderful kind of win-win situation, which to me is what, if you get ecosystem services right and manage, look after them and manage them, then it works for both halves really, really well.
Where do we not get that message across to people? Where do we fail in getting that message across to people, the farmers, for instance, that that's actually a win-win scenario for them? Why is it so hard?
I think by putting it into money, so ecosystem services have taken an awful lot of kind of stick over the years for trying to monetize it, putting values on things that are sometimes intrinsically really, really difficult to put values on. How do you value a view or something like that? But I think actually what it does do is it puts it on the table along with lots of other decision-making things. So, farmers along with lots of other people want to do the right thing, but at the same time, they have to earn a living. And I think by actually kind of in that particular case, putting a value on it is actually really a very helpful thing to do. So what was it you particularly liked with your paper is the fact that you could actually see a route map out of, because sometimes the news can be a bit depressing, actually. It's all the world's going down the tube, basically. But this is a route map out.
Yeah, and I think it touches again on a few of the points that you were making. One of them is the putting a dollar value on it. We're starting to think about carbon in a similar way as to what we've thought about pollination. So historically, it's easier to put a dollar value in pollination because we rely on it as food, but we're now starting to see that we've dug a hole so deep in terms of the climate emergency that we're starting to have to think about what value we place on carbon and its emissions. So it essentially gives you a way of a roadmap or a way of prioritizing and saying, well, if you are going to be in sort of thinking about a nature-based solution like reforestation? Where are you best off doing it, and where perhaps should you not be doing it as well, which is an equally important piece of the puzzle, and a message that often gets confused and muddled and doesn't quite come across right.
Yeah, that probably brings on the idea. It's one of the reasons it's difficult. It's not just about ecologists like you and I. So we work as ecologists in a biology department, but to do a lot of ecosystem service stuff, you actually need teams which actually have other types of scientists on board. So if you want to put money value on things, I mean, the blueberry paper is actually it's not quite back of an envelope type calculations, but it's sort of stuff that a biologist could probably just about manage. But to do it properly, working with environmental economists and things like that, and actually those interdisciplinary teams, which presumably in your field as well, you can't, if you can do trees, you need to do more than be able to count and measure trees to actually do the carbon side of things.
Yeah, and I mean, especially if you start thinking about the kind of scale at which people are talking about, having seen some of these sort of ecosystem interventions or restorations, which are, some of the scales are huge. And if you don't start bringing in people who think about land use, and people who think about maybe ways of measuring forests at scale using remote sensing or other kind of technologies, and people who actually understand the ecology of these trees. So why one species might grow really well somewhere but not so well somewhere else. And if you don't really think about that carefully, then it can be, you're not really going to get very far.
The biggest, most exciting projects that I've been involved with in the last few years have been these interdisciplinary projects where you're working with people that do really different things to you. And if you think about it, those really big problems that society faces, that you and I kind of work on the ecological angle to, they require people with skill sets that are really different to the ones that we've got to solve them. But by working together as a team with the ecologist, with the economist, with the social scientist, sometimes with the engineers and things like that, then together you can actually get some way towards really solving them. And the project I'm super excited about at the moment that we're working on actually involves working as an ecologist with climate change people and human nutritionists, actually. So working with people in at UCL and Harvard and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine that work on human nutrition, and we're really interested in the effect of climate change on pollinators, how that affects crop production, and then how that kind of has the knock-on effects on the human diet, particularly with regard to micronutrients like folic acid and vitamin A. And there was a chance that between us, a good chance, we can actually do something that none of us could do individually.
Yeah, we've had really good fortune of Cabot sort of instigating a really nice collaboration between a local NGO charity based here in Bristol that's looking to buy up land and essentially reforest it and hopefully rewild it in the future. And we've been involved with them in trying to set up some small scale experiments with other colleagues in Bristol as well. And just thinking about if there are any easy ways that we could boost the initial recovery of these trees that are being planted in these agricultural soils that are impoverished, and a lot of the sort of biodiversity that is sort of that we don't think of, all the things that live in the soil, all the microorganisms, all the fungi, all the bacteria, the nematodes, all these things that we're a bit squeamish about and we don't want to think about, but actually are fundamental to plants as well. It's very much an interaction between them. And so we're thinking about whether there's ways in which we can restore those below ground communities by inoculating soils from ancient woodlands into these grasslands. It's a bit akin to when people think about your microbiome in your stomach and trying to reset it if you've gone through a course of antibiotics or something like that. It's the same kind of thing. But yes, definitely organizations like Cabot that do this brilliantly in enabling these collaborations.
Yeah, that kind of matchmaking service they can do is actually really super useful. I've heard that soil community referred to as the poor man's rainforest. Actually, it is ridiculously diverse what's down there.
And it's exciting because it's also it's still a bit of a black box to even to ecologists. We don't really know that much about it, and we don't know exactly what all those soil organisms are necessarily doing. So trying to piece that together is also ecologically quite stimulating and interesting. So it's nice to be able to do something that's got that I can see a real practical application for, but also that I enjoy doing the science of. I had a question for you, actually, Jane. So one impression that I've got in the last sort of being an ecologist for the last 10 years or so is that this push towards interdisciplinarity and thinking about the real applied outcomes of your work is something that's become more and more prominent. It's much harder to justify yourself today as an ecologist if your work doesn't really have an applied angle to it. Do you think that's true, or is it something just what we see, that I see around us, and it's actually always been like that?
I mean, doing interdisciplinary work, I've heard described as being suitable for the very young who are kind of, high risk and possibly foolhardy. They tend to take a risk, and the elderly, the older people that actually have made they've made their reputation and can afford to do high risk things. And there's a big bunch of people in the middle that don't do it because it's just not the right sort of stage. And I'm just wondering, what we can do to make people more comfortable with doing interdisciplinary work. I mean, there are some funding sources which certainly, big carrots are always useful. But, about training youngsters, I mean, I would love to see a system whereby students get a chance, a biology student gets a chance to work with an engineer, a social scientist, and perhaps a philosopher, just someone, and actually put them into teams and see what they come up with. I mean, certainly I met a really good philosopher through Cabot, actually, at one of a kind of a mingly thing, pre-pandemic type thing. And we kept in touch for quite a few years and went to each other's away days and things. And the philosophy of the ethics of the environment are actually really interesting. Meeting people with different ways of thinking about problems, is really quite mind expanding, actually, and very useful, very practical.
It's often easier to form these collaborative ties than you think it's going to be. I think a barrier often seems to be that people are scared that it won't work, or if they reach out, the answer is going to be no. And my experience has almost never been the case. And so it's that taking that first step is often the biggest hurdle, but it's very rewarding.
I just love that about academia, the way that you do contact complete strangers on the other side of the world with this crazy idea. And they're enthusiastic in return. It is one of the best bits about being a kind of an academic, that network, that community of people, willing to take a risk on a new idea is just brilliant. I mean, something we're both really keen on at the moment is the whole business of rewilding and kind of just thinking about the ecosystem service side of that, because that, even if we're just looking, the world over, it's kind of quite a happening field, but even just here in the UK, in terms of kind of things like, I don't know, water quality, water quantity, kind of ecosystem services of water provision, conservation of biodiversity, and the sort of stuff you do, the whole kind of carbon side of things, and also the ability to kind of, I always love the way that you can do things from your office, somewhere in Borneo, basically, you don't have to worry about the weather and all the stuff that I have to kind of worry about when going out to do field work. But that side of things is really super interesting.
Working with remote sensing data has certainly been a helpful thing over the last 12 months. It gives you a way out of your office, essentially. So that's absolutely true. But yeah, I think that rewilding as a concept, even though it remains slightly poorly defined, or at least people have different definitions of exactly what it is a really, really interesting way to think about how we think about nature and how it relates to people and land use and ecosystem services and all of that. I think it's going to be one of the themes of the next few decades.
Yeah, no, and it's a tremendous exciting period right now, actually, because there's kind of a policy window out there as well with kind of follow up from kind of the whole Brexit thing, the agriculture bills and environmental bills. There's things coming through that means that there's quite a lot of moving parts at the moment, and quite exactly where they all settle out. It's there is a tremendous opportunity for change in a way that actually really benefits both the environment and our kind of use of those, or effectively freebies that the environment provides if we look after it properly. So I think that's really, yeah, that's really exciting.
I see it a lot in my field at the moment, where there's been a big push from government and elsewhere, this specifically in the UK, about sort of thinking about reforesting and the fact that we should be planting a whole bunch of trees. And there's big plans to increase forest cover in the UK by several percentage points over the next few decades, which would be one of the sort of biggest transformations of the landscape that you would have seen for a while, which is exciting as an opportunity, and also sometimes a bit scary, because you as a scientist, I sometimes get a bit worried that we're going to lose a bit of the nuance, which is important in terms of thinking of exactly how we do these kind of interventions and where we do them and what species we might be planting and in which type of soil and which type of habitat. And there's a worry that some of that nuance might be lost as it sort of bubbles up to from research all the way up to sort of actual big scale policy. Because there are opportunities to get things badly wrong as well as really, really right.
I've done quite a bit of work on pause, so plantations on ancient woodland sites. So it was an ancient woodland and then it got turned into a plantation. And then what's the best way to restore it back to something like its former glory without waiting 400 years odd, which is the kind of current definition of what makes a woodland ancient? Can we fast track things? And it's slightly alarming with woodlands as an ecologist, actually, because if you look at all of different groups, so the woodland birds, woodland plants, woodland butterflies, are all slowly declining. We're all used to seeing those declines of birds on farmland, say, but there's this kind of, even on big woodland nature reserves, stuff is starting, it's going down, and we don't entirely understand why. And it's probably some mixture of climate change and this and that and extinction debts and all sorts of things. So getting that woodland side of things back is really, really important, and it is a magical habitat.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think that in our collective imagination, we probably have this view of somewhere like Great Britain being completely covered in woodland a few millennia ago. I mean, almost certainly we know it wasn't actually the case. No, it was much more of a matrix of different types of habitats kept open by large herbivores and top predators that hunted on those herbivores, and all these cascading ecological effects, which sort of goes back to the whole idea of rewilding as a concept of sort of like trying to restore some of these processes and keep these habitats as a mosaic, where you've got within an area, you've got all of the different types of habitats, and you're sort of getting the most for biodiversity, and also probably in terms of ecosystem services that those communities are providing.
Do you reckon the whole COVID thing, I mean, people are much more appreciative of green space, I think, than they were a year ago. I mean, gardens have been an absolute sanity saver. And actually, I do wonder whether there will be a shift in attitude toward looking much more benevolently and enthusiastically over, green space generally, both in towns and cities. It's super important in towns and cities, and really important for ecosystem services, actually, in terms of flooding and heat island type effects, but also in the wider countryside. So
I was thinking exactly that. Of like, we've been talking a bit about nature conservation in the whatever it is, the great outdoors, the countryside. But actually, there's a lot of nature conservation that you could do right on your doorstep in a city, in a town.
If you've got a garden, you've got your own little tiny nature reserve, basically, and it is one of those things where you can then. You're up close and personal with your own, there's bumblebees and moths and all sorts of things. And what's really brilliant about cities is where most of the population live. And so any diversity you can get into cities is good for diversity, but also it brings people and nature close together, because we can't all live in the countryside and see it every day, but actually everybody it should be an absolute right rather than a luxury to be able to go through a bit of green space every day, whether it's on the walk to the station or to the shopping mall or, to collect the kids from school or whatever. And I think, and there's so much evidence now that green space is actually really good for physical and mental health, that actually, I'm sure if you do the economics, it pays for itself really quite quickly. There's really good data come out from Germany recently showing that been within 100 meters of a tree, there's a reduced use of antidepressants, and that's an even stronger effect in the poorer parts of town. If you invest in those green spaces, I'm sure, if budgets were all joined up and you save money on the kind of health side of things, it would be really obvious.
Thinking also in human health and all that kind of thing. I mean, there's some really nice research in the last few years showing the sort of the climate amelioration or the sort of climate buffering effect that sort of urban forest can have, sort of lowering the temperature during extreme events, and when you get a big heat wave coming through in the summer, and that can affect people's health negatively, really quite badly. It's quite amazing how much of an impact having a few trees around you can have.
And actually, I think in terms of, back to economics, kind of house prices and things, if you've got a view of the sea or over a woodland or something like that, people are willing to pay more for something like that, because it does make a difference to your, to look out of the window onto something like that is rather special. And actually getting kids involved in that side of things, I think, is super important, looking forward. So school grounds do some really exciting things. And actually on the Urban Pollinators project, we planted meadows in school grounds. Our meadows were 300 meters square, 300 square meters, so 30 meters by 10. And you can put in a meadow and kids can do all sorts of, curriculum-based activities, or just enjoying watching them. Everyone likes sitting next to a flowery patch. A packet of seeds is like a symbol of hope. It's just wonderful. It's, almost anything could happen. So, yeah. So what do you reckon the kind of take-home messages are about kind of ecosystem services and things like that?
You summarized one of them really well before, which is that they can, if done right, have these really win-win scenarios for nature, for also for climate, in terms of we're thinking about climate-based solutions, and also for people. And it's sort of it is exciting, and it is a way for us as scientists to be able to really showcase the value of why it is important that we look after nature, and we do the kind of work that we do. So I think that's where I get excited.
And yeah, it'd be interesting to see 10 years ahead what has actually happened as a, that look into the crystal ball. Hopefully the country is more forested. Hopefully there's all sorts of positive things with, we've been watching cities flood for the last kind of 10 years in a way they just didn't when I was a kid. That change in climate and rainfall, and the change in use of uplands and so on. And there are some solutions out there. Nature-based solutions are really quite exciting. And it might be that some of those are starting to, really happen in 5 to 10 years. And also it comes back to this idea of, interdisciplinary research. You often do need people looking at a problem from different angles. And I think now is the moment to be really kind of seizing on that, for kind of policymakers. And there are some tremendous opportunities. I think the public is behind the environment in a way that it might not have been a couple of years ago, because of that whole appreciation due to COVID and the importance of green space. Right now is a period of tremendous possibility. And we really need to kind of, make things happen, basically.